Welcome to Strip Cover Lit. I am Adrian Fort, and we are here for the fourth in what will be a 7-part series as we drag ourselves kicking and screaming through the experience which we have come to know as Chuck Palahniuk's Haunted. And this discussion is for pages 301 through 404. It will be the final discussion video for the book. After this, we will have, again, the rant, the 5 writing lessons from, and the full review, which will conclude our experience here and conclude the suite that is Haunted. And we should begin by saying that Dissertation by the Missing Link and Poster Child by Miss Clark and Something's Got to Give by Countess Forsyte, which are short stories which appear in Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk, written by the subsequent characters named, all felt like novels. And they felt like novels in a bad way. There is a good way and a bad way for a short story to feel like a novel. The good way, and you're going to groan at this, no groaning allowed, is like Hemingway makes short stories feel like a novel, or like George Saunders makes short stories feel like a novel, in that they are so rich and so dense and so full and so real that they feel like more than 13, 20 pages of writing, or in Hemingway's case, 5 pages of a short story. And the way you do that is that you build real characters in a short period of time, you put them in a real place in that same story, and you give the story emotional ups and downs and twists and turns that are earned. Earned being the key ingredient to emotional turns in a story. And when you do that, a short story feels like so much more than than the space that it encompassed and the ink that it used. There is also a bad way for a short story to feel like a novel, and that is that it feels like it should have been a novel, in that things are set up and twists are given, but the turns are never earned. For example, we never care about a character which is the prime character, the prime mover of the story. If we don't care about that character, we're not going to give a damn about what goes on with the character in the story. If we care about the character, but we don't really care about the secondary characters, the same thing can take place, because normally it's the secondary characters that influence that prime mover into a place where he or she changes. And if those secondary characters feel throwaway, which is very easy to happen in short stories, when those secondary characters feel throwaway, then the obstacles which are raised and the twists and turns which are endured by that prime mover character don't feel like they matter. It feels like an epiphany, an aha moment. And when a character has an aha moment, it doesn't work in literature in quite the way, in written literature quite the way that it does in movies. For example, like The Sixth Sense by M. Night Shyamalan, for lack of a better example off the top of my head, wouldn't work as a book. That type of twist ending is something that you can't just do in literature and expect the payoff to be there, because it feels cheap, right? The "and then I woke up" ending in literature feels like a kick in the pants, because nothing, why did you waste my time? Nothing prior to this sentence mattered. So those are more examples. Dissertation, Poster Child, and Something's Got to Give are further examples in this collection of short stories calling itself a novel that are the bad examples of short stories that feel like novels. Chapter 23 begins with this quote: "The ghost light is our only campfire left, our last chance. The glaring bare bulb on a tall stand center stage. The safety valve made to keep old gaslight theaters from exploding, or the light always left on inside a new theater to keep any ghost from calling the place home." This seems to me to be written as an exasperated sigh, not a sigh of relief so much, but a sigh of recognition. A sigh that we are now remiss to the future which awaits us. The problem, unless the problem is my reading, which is entirely possible, but the problem with this feeling like a sigh, an exasperated sigh, is that that sigh is never earned. The rest of this story feels, from the character's perspective, to be just kind of, what can we do which is more out there than the last thing that we saw, which is unfortunately oftentimes how Chuck Palahniuk's literature feels. Snuff, for example, just feels like a collection of one-upsmanship on the days that the writer sat down to write. What can I do that is more insane than what I wrote yesterday? Still, with Snuff, there is some literary value. There is something to be taken as a reader. There's something to be learned as a writer. But I am not sure that it warrants the full novel that it is encompassed within. Now, how could this tone at the end of the novel, which this is page 376 out of 404, how could this tone have been earned to this point? How could this tone have felt natural to this point if we gave a damn about any of the characters? But we don't. If we gave a damn that these characters have seemingly gone in this tone from, yeah, I'm going to be famous and I'm going to be the next big thing, to, yeah, is it really worth it? Is that what I want to do? This is all so hard. Maybe I'll just close my eyes for a little bit. But we don't ever get there. My first time through the book, however, it was the final short story known as Obsolete, which is written by Whittier, that really sold the book as a collective, coherent experience to me. In this short story, it is the short story that really pulled everything else in the novel together. The second time through, it still feels that way. It still feels like it is this umbrella which protects the rest of the story from being completely throwaway. This little immeret at the end of the journey. But it's much less gratifying the second time around, especially if you are like me looking for it to save the rest of it. That's sort of how I felt about the book as a whole. This is part because the novelty of the novel and this collection of short story, poetry, and story itself wears off. The novelty of that experience isn't as strong the second time. And it's part because I've read it before, and I think possibly mostly it is because my palate as a reader has shifted. And I think that it might be important to explain that a little bit for anyone who doesn't necessarily know what I mean by that. My palate as a reader has shifted. When I very first started drinking, it was wine. I was charged with being the liquor guy where I worked. And moving all those bottles of wine back and forth and into the back room, out of the back room, and putting them all on the shelf and watching them all get sold, I sort of wondered what they tasted like. I started drinking very late in the game. I started drinking at, I think, 22. Had never really drank alcohol before. It was something that I had seen in my childhood. I didn't want to fall into it. But when I did finally take up alcohol, everything tasted like isopropyl, except for Barefoot Moscato. I know. Don't say anything. But that was what, to the young palate, tasted good, right? And from there, eventually I was able to build a taste for Pinot Grigios and then Chardonnays. And now, you know, I drink window cleaner if it didn't give me such a hangover. But the point to that is I was stuck on Moscato. It's what I would drink with everything, and I loved it. And now even thinking of Moscato gives me a stomach ache. Even thinking of Moscato gives me a sugar hangover. Even thinking of Moscato makes me want to throw up a little bit. But I'm not the only one who developed a palate by trying Moscato first, or liking Moscato first. Moscatos, White Zinfandels, Burgundies, Blushes, and other bold and sweet flavors are often starters for drinkers. And if you walk into most wine aisles, you can notice they start with sweet wines. And they will progress into White Zinfandels and Moscatos, and from there you'll get the white wines, the Pinot Grigios, the Chardonnays. From there you start going into the red wines. The wine aisle progresses like most people's palates progress. Chuck Palahniuk was admittedly more of a starter author for me, and I hate admitting this. It's very painful for me to say, but between the ages of 18 and 22, probably 23 if I'm really being honest with myself, I didn't do much reading. Adrian's literary warriorhood was lost to the game of life, and then I found a bold and tangy flavor that got me drunk, that bold and tangy flavor being namely Chuck Palahniuk. He was someone, and I think it's worth noting that 18 and 22, I was not in college, right? I had gone into the game of life rolling both dice. I was not able to really separate myself from the working world to pursue an education, and that for a lot of people, unfortunately, myself included, that's what kills the reading experience for you. That's where the creative life goes to die. And when I found Chuck Palahniuk's work through Fight Club, I got drunk. And that's one thing I will always say for Chuck Palahniuk, is he is a very good writer to, especially for males, to introduce back into things, because his writing is so tough and so gritty, and his characters are so bold, and his characters feel right to a reader who is maybe not ready for the nuance of something like Hemingway, like Fitzgerald, like Saunders, like Tom Spanbauer. For someone who is not necessarily I know that sounds condescending to say, but it's true. It's absolutely true. For someone who is not ready to see the nuance in literature, the nuance in literature doesn't make sense. And Chuck Palahniuk, while he does from time to time contain some nuance, a lot of it's right there in your face, and that is helpful for I think newer readers, or readers being reintroduced to literature, or readers who are not there yet. The under the surface level for Palahniuk, it's like if you go to a creek, you can grab the big rocks and pick them up, and you see what's under there. That is sort of how the themes and whatnot in Palahniuk's writing work. So that is it for the fourth and final discussion video for Haunted Will Go. If you like this sort of thing, hit like and subscribe. If you have not already, there is a link in the description below to my Patreon if you are willing to do something such as that. Stay tuned in the series for Rant, a 5 writing tips, and a full review from Haunted.